Do people have to be aware that they have moved to the right for it to actually count as a move to the right?
Dung weche pek kod welo mabiro etu under mic. Dung parodit kod jok mawuoye etu under mic. Seche tin sud buta wawinji etu under mic. Wola wachokre wabed piny biwawinje ero chako moment ndi and a mic podcast makende.
Do people have to be aware that they've moved to the right for it to count as a move to the right? Well, this is a weird question in some ways because politics should in theory recognize political agency. In a democratically politicized system where people have the right to vote and are actively encouraged to participate, understanding your own political persuasion makes the act of voting a bit easier. Subsequently, it makes sense for people to experience an awareness, at least, of their own political position on the spectrum. Yet what if they simply vote for a party because of a single policy point? What if they do so because of a single tragic event? What if they vote for an extremist fascist party because they have fallen victim to the lies and manipulative messaging of the far right, and the lack of sensible and responsible responses from the more traditional parties? What if someone simply votes for the far right because they have voted for every other party over the years and there has never been a significant change in living standards worthy of the name? Does that mean the voter has moved to the right, or that the political system has simply let them down? And in that case, what should they then do? I am a progressive, I'd like to think, democratic socialist. I do not see politics as being simply about fitting realities into a doctrine and bending things to match my feelings and thoughts. There are decisions that need to be made which would work best with a conservative approach. I see that in how age-old institutions keep hold of certain principles so as to maintain their standards. This can be applied to legal institutions in particular. As long as the law that is being applied is fundamentally fair and equal for all. That would be my progressive part, sneaking in at the back door, making sure everything is in order. Yet the phenomenon we are experiencing currently, and have been for some time now, is defined by a growing number of people choosing to side with parties that are openly xenophobic, even if in the UK, for example, that xenophobia is filtered. In other countries, it is quite obvious, like the AfD in Germany, the Party of Le Pen in France, and Viktor Orban in Hungary. We don't need to mention the orange terrorist in the White House. What used to be a hard core of less than 10% who voted for fascist parties has exploded to from 25% to 37% depending on the region. The reasons for these numbers are many. It's true that the vast majority of these regions are poor and run down and in need of investment. However, there are some areas where that is not the case. There are some areas where most people are middle class and live in relative comfort. One shoe does not fit all feet. A crazy reality we have also seen in many places is where communities are made up of by more than 90% white locals, yet they tend to be hotbeds for anti-immigration. Why? Migration hasn't even touched their communities at all, and yet they are the loudest. Now, some say it's because they have seen what has happened in the big cities and how crime has become commonplace and that it is unacceptable. Well, I've spoken previously about the delusions of the right. Small villages after the Second World War were rebuilt by locals. Large cities were completely different and therefore needed outside assistance. In Germany, where I am told almost every major city was destroyed during the war, cheap external labor was found to speed up the process of rebuilding, not to mention the scores and hundreds of women involved in the task. It didn't happen overnight, and the people coming in wanted some kind of guarantee, and many stayed. to forget that people from different countries came to Germany or to France or the UK to help rebuild the country, and everywhere else that was destroyed, is disgraceful. Nationalists today talk about how great their countries are and how wonderful their cities would be if returned to past greatness. Would that be before they had been rebuilt by migrants? Yet they forget who helped build them up into what they see today. Maybe more attention needs to be paid to showing people exactly how the process developed and who did what. People should also do some homework on the history of crime, because they will clearly be surprised to learn that crime existed before immigration became a political, thing. Yet I am jumping the gun a little. I couldn't resist. In the past, I have spoken about the problem being the system, and that is still the case. The problem comes from how people view that system. I will give you an example. The current German Minister for Economic Affairs and Energy is Katharina Reiche. She used to be a lobbyist for the fossil fuel industry. Let me repeat that for you so you don't have to do the modern digital form of rewinding the tape. Katharina Reiche, the German Minister for Economic Affairs and Energy, used to be a lobbyist for the fossil fuel industry. Well, I wonder how she got this job then. So everybody knew what to expect from her. In her acceptance speech, she quoted neoliberal Alfred Müller-Armack, very typical of post-war Germany, but with fluctuations here and there on emphasis. Different governments would presumably ask themselves, shall we go more towards the social or more towards the free market? Alfred himself prioritized the growth of wealth, so basically the rich were pacified when they heard that. The social bit was paying lip service to the left. Just like what Minister Reiche did when she spoke about renewable energy. She stated that the renewables alone were not enough to stabilize Germany's energy needs. So instead of making sure Germany would develop its infrastructure further to make sure renewable energy, which is unlimited, can be made to cover all domestic and industrial needs, she decided to step back and reroute Germany's dependence onto an energy source which is limited, oil and gas, and which Germany itself has little of, and which will ensure Germany remains dependent on other countries for its energy supply. Not to mention how in the UK it has reported that renewable energy will be cheaper than fossil fuels by that very far-off, distant year of 2028. Well, that is super intelligent from Minister Reiche, isn't it? Or maybe it's just extremely biased politicking. She also mentioned how important it was to maintain trade with Germany's most important trade partner, the USA. Well, how is that working out for you? Despite some of the failures even this podcast channel has mentioned regarding Canada, notably the continued genocide of Indigenous people, as explained very clearly by Dr. Samantha Beauchamp, at least Mark Carney had the courage to challenge the international order a little bit. Yet in the same speech in which Minister Reiche labels Germany the largest economy in the EU, she also states how she will lobby in Brussels to attain a free trade agreement with the USA. How about recognizing the political realities for what they are and begin to introduce the sensible and pragmatic concepts she referred to in her acceptance speech? Well, in that case, why haven't people questioned the position held on hydrogen to make energy use climate neutral with a technology that will not be ready to be rolled out for years and years? Or her position on international trade? Germany has been so well represented in the auto industry for so many years, it is finding the drop-off of German car sales in other nations because of stern competition in the EV market, from China in particular, a serious challenge. The lack of recognition in this area and the arrogant determination to continue on this course says a lot about Reiche's approach. She is banging someone else's head against the door rather than turning the handle to walk in. Why is she doing that? Well, for a start, it's someone else's head, so why does she care? Secondly, by the time the disaster of her policies truly emerges, she'll be on the board of some large corporation earning millions, having allowed the fossil fuel industry to destroy the future of human existence that much more quickly. Well done for being so sensible and pragmatic. So to reiterate, we have a fossil fuel lobbyist destroying the social economy to continue pushing neoliberalism, blaming the recession on social policies when very few actual social policies have been properly applied in the last 20 years, and who wants to reduce the energy price for German citizens by building greater dependencies on foreign supplies and a fuel resource that is limited and that the rest of the world also remains dependent on. That is a long sentence to say there's something fishy going on. So we need to break things down into basic elements. Not just the hypocrisies expressed here, but also more than that. This will be hard to do in a podcast of this length, so I won't even pretend to cover even half the major points. As I alluded to above, I think politics should always attend to the realities. Some realities are staring us in the face, and nothing is usually mentioned of them. In the last 17 years, 2 international events have threatened our understanding of the world: the global financial crisis and the corona pandemic. The first had catastrophic consequences for the financial sector, and it set a lot of the big players up for a fall, even though the even bigger fish probably did quite well out of it in the end. I guess cutting off a few bad banks here and there was actually good for business. The corona pandemic showed us how important our supply systems are to our way of life and how IT basically makes sure we can still continue to produce even under extremely unfamiliar pressures. Someone should let Merz know that people in general want to be productive. In each of these periods, the political West was quite vulnerable. No major attacks came. There may have been what can be termed as skirmishes here and there, but attacks the like of which we have seen in recent years, since the pandemic was declared at an end, did not materialize. Why was that? Is it because the supposed enemy was taking a breather? Or is it because the real enemies of peace were otherwise engaged? The real problems in our societies are probably quite similar in many countries: food, housing, education, healthcare, jobs, and law and order. So how do we solve these problems? By bombing someone else, and thereby creating more people without homes and who will need to relocate to live? How do we solve these problems by being complicit in a genocide? How do we solve these problems by watering down our human rights laws? How do we solve these problems by privatizing public services like the NHS? How do we solve these problems by giving insidious IT companies access to private data? How do we solve these problems by allowing poor quality food to flood into supermarkets? How do we solve these problems by continuing to build luxury flats and very little by way of what can realistically be called affordable housing? How do we solve these problems by giving police greater powers to prevent peaceful protests that are fundamental to a functioning democracy? How do we solve these problems by covering up international sex and child sex trafficking rings of every kind? The answer to all of those questions is we don't. None of these policies, which our taxes are being misused to fund, address those problems. And if some smart git turns around and says it's because we need to protect democracy abroad, I'd like to politely tell them to piss off and start focusing on creating a democracy back home. Glass house and stones of various sizes spring to mind. If we were so damn good at democracy, how is it that over 80 years after having won a war in the name of democracy, we still have police beating civilians up in the streets for protesting peacefully? What kind of democracy is it that the government, which has been elected by the people, doesn't want to listen to their grievances? If a people or a minority cannot protest to their heart's content, even at the extreme displeasure and discomfort of the government, then it is not a democracy. When a government is being stage managed by lobby groups from other countries in order to allow the most heinous of crimes against humanity to continue, then that government should resign immediately or forever lose any right it has to credibility. If democracy had been the victor all of those years ago, how is it we suddenly have a growing number of far-right political parties that actually want to take away our democratic rights? Do you call that a democratic success story? If you think that means the Second World War was a necessary evil, you are quite a few sandwiches short of a picnic hamper. Why would you celebrate victory over Nazis only to do the bidding of fascists? Every single anti-democratic action that has been taken in the last 29 years has taken the UK one baby step closer to fascism. The principles that the war was fought on have gone out of the window. The alliances, and I mean the real alliances, were the first to go. Without the communists, there would have been no resistance in France or Germany. Yet as soon as the Nazis fell, the Democrats decided to exclude the heroes who had fought behind enemy lines and at great cost and risk from any future government. That sound like the kind of democracy you want? Oh, because they were communists, it's okay, is it? Since then, the attacks have become relentless against socialism. The same socialism that made sure people had a future without war. The same socialism that created laws against mass murder and genocide. The same socialism that created human rights. Of course, the socialists were not the only ones, but those principles were most vociferously defended by socialists. And the right-wing neoliberals want to bring them down. So considering that, what exactly are we trying to protect in these other areas of conflict? Because it sure as shit isn't democracy. Yet our governments keep coming back to this method as though it was necessary. And by that I mean they keep seeking legitimacy from the people by pointing extravagantly to the evils of others, constantly hoping that we will overlook those same evils being committed by politicians and leaders much closer to home. They keep on treating the people, you and me, like shit. The wealth gap is beyond incomprehensibly large. Education has been sold out. Healthcare is on the chopping block. Public transportation is late. Energy is weak. The food is poor. The housing is falling apart. The rivers stink. The beaches are brown. The politicians that are destroying the UK and other parts of the world because our governments don't really care about them should tell us something of their true intentions. Right-wingers say they are patriots. So why aren't they stopping governments from destroying the nature in our countries? If you are patriots, why don't you support the social welfare of your fellow countryfolk? Why do you allow these puppet fascists to make money off of your backs while they grift and lie and cavort with international criminals? If you are patriots and you care about women and girls, then why aren't you screaming for the Epstein horrors to be fully released and for all of the bastards who abused and hurt all the girls and women to be brought to justice? Where is your indignation? Where is your anger? Where is your patriotism? Or is the patriotism itself a mask in the colours of your flags to allow you to turn your feelings of incompetence, disaffection and shame into the kind of hate that seeks out people who are different? Are your insecurities what drive your prejudices and turn them into acts of violence? So many people on the right have similar positions. They don't like foreigners, yet they support war in foreign lands and would love to go out there and shoot a few people. They are not too keen on people trying to shoot back, though. That's not fair. It's okay to bomb other countries and call it democracy, but when they do it, it's called terrorism. Until, of course, they start doing it for us, at which time they become heroes. Ah, these fair-weather Democrats can be so inclusive when they want. These same right-wingers think the climate crisis is a hoax. They don't support any climate initiatives, and so I would imagine they are happy for a data center to be built next door to them. Maybe they should experience that at first hand and see how they feel. They don't like China, yet their lives depend on products made in China. They drink beer brewed usually in other countries. They complain about Europe, yet want to go there on holiday. They want British jobs for British people, but they don't have the money to pay for them. Proper wages, after all, in all of the affected industries, would increase retail prices greatly. They are protectors of women if non-whites rape and abuse them. But if they are mates or leaders or law enforcement or religious representatives, then they are silent. Have they ever considered the perspectives of the survivors? Have they perhaps thought that the survivors don't want to be mistreated by anyone whatsoever, no matter what their single descriptive characteristic may be, beyond, in most situations, being men? Is that patriotism? We all know that none of these positions is patriotic, because most of these positions are scarcely even humane. Yet how many of these people actually exist? These people appear to be merely the hardcore, the fanatical ones. The types that would shoot women and men in cold blood while wearing masks and pretending to be law enforcement officers. Real people, real patriots, know that these actions are wrong. They know that society should look after those who need to be looked after. They believe in fairness, democracy, social justice, human rights. They believe that support systems should be in place. The main concerns of these people appear to be that they have been left behind and people from different countries have been prioritized ahead of them. That's not really true, though, and it never has been. Yes, there are, of course, individual cases where people from abroad have been given favorable treatment. But any step up for someone who has nothing will seem like they have been given the world. For the natives who already have homes, who already speak English or the local language, who have a work permit, who have an officially recognized education, well, what do they need the extra language lessons for? What do they need another flat for if they already have one? It is never straightforward, I know, but the basic decency that most cultures claim to possess talks of giving people a fair chance. The people who have made those chances unfair are the ones wearing suits and having meetings in parliaments, town halls and executive suites, and the boats that they travel in have very little chance of capsizing either. If these people cannot see who has really caused the ills of their society, can they be truly accused of being right-wing? Have they simply been so insidiously manipulated for such a long time that they have lost all grasp of what it means to analyze a situation objectively? When I look at the UK, I don't see common people sitting in the Commons. I see people who have benefited from powerful establishment networks, who are there to do a specific job that has very little to do with representing their constituencies. For that reason, I find the Green victory in Gorton and Denton to be particularly significant. Of the main parties that participated, and by that I'm referring to Labour, the Tories, Reform and the Greens, only the Greens have shown themselves to be a party that hasn't sold out to lobbyists. Labour and the Tories, in their recent stints in government, have removed the whip from MPs who chose to follow the wishes of constituents above party lines. Labour and the Tories all boast senior candidates who have received vast amounts of campaign donations from similar entities, ensuring both parties toe a certain line. Reform have sold out to any right-winger with a penny to spare and are very chummy with a host of people connected to the Epstein files. Those associations presumably didn't prioritise the well-being of women and girls, nor indeed the interests of the average British citizen. The point is not so much whether, in the case of Reform, this had anything to do with their official work. Of course it didn't. Yet it goes to the heart of the principles of those who run things in that organisation. It tells you that money and influence are so much more important than principles. Farage may talk about being British and having principles, but when he talked about Nick Candy, and he mentioned the price of property he wanted to sell as being £39 million, he dropped the figure in that sickeningly stuck-up way, saying, hey, for that kind of money, Reform would sell anything they had on offer. It would seem they'd sell absolutely anything for a lot less. When I see politicians talking about principles, about culture, about how things used to be, about making things great again, about Stadtbild in German, the fundamental constitution of a city or culture, I have to question what they are really referring to. What period of history, or what chapter, or what page even? Then there are so many other associated questions. Nature is about evolution. That means change is unavoidable. No natural experiment whereby humans have tried to return a place to its former beauty has ever been successful, and I'm referring to gardens and parks. Ecosystems cannot be reversed. Humans may have created a name tag for a god or gods, but humans cannot play at being gods. There is a reason why that power was never given to our species. The best thing under the circumstances that modern society can try to do is to sustain life, and to do so to the highest levels of quality possible for the whole of humanity. Yet our global system doesn't allow that. The pain and suffering and destruction brought on one group will be visited upon another, and then another, and then another. We have seen that throughout history, even though our history books are a revisionist's wet dreams, inasmuch as they paint a very one-sided picture. The essence of this post comes down to then this. It is a desperate plea, an invitation. Please wake up. Look at the world for what it really is. How can it always be that the ones being abused are the ones painted by right-wingers as those who are at fault? How many survivor stories do you have to read before you realize they had a point all along? How close does the knife have to come to the skin before people start to see the real dangers that lurk all around? Don't simply fall prey to the propaganda machines. Don't let the suits fool you. Don't believe that just because people look more like you than some others, that they think and act like you. Of course, there are no hard and fast rules, and we cannot generalize. So don't do that either. Take every case and every person on their own merits. Criticize the ones who would harm society. Don't support them, hoping you will be saved. That safety is temporary at best. This is Two and a Mic. Rise up and be curious.
Two and a mic. Two and a mic.